Hey there, Bruce, and welcome back to Misericorde Volume 1. I don't exactly remember where we left off, so we're just going to keep reading and then it'll come back to me because I'm old, you know, so it's just what happens. I mean, you'll get there. You'll get there. I heard her bawling over there and thought, that's right, I remember now. The little one, Flora, she got really drunk and shit, and then, yeah, that's right. I heard her bawling over here and thought to stay out of it, but now she's at the table yammering on and on about cats. How are you faring? Me? I'm well. We need to talk to Catherine about the thing still. About the kid. Having fun? To a degree. Are we meant to be having fun? We're nuns. We've been consoling Flora. It worked. She's back to being quite irritating. Well, you can thank Hedwig. She's the expert. Oh, did you impart some of your anchorous wisdom? Yes, I suppose I did. It was tough, but it was what Flora needed to hear. Marvellous. I still remember visiting your odd little window and asking all about something or other. You were quite a blunt instrument, if I recall. Was I? I once came to the window to ask what the punishment for breaking your promise was. You were prepared with a whole lecture about how I shouldn't be taking any oaths in the first place, with several citations from Matthew on hand, of course. I'm afraid I don't remember that. It was years and years ago. That doesn't surprise me. Do you remember many of our questions? Do you know who asked what? I remember questions, but not who asked them. And I wouldn't tell anyone if I did. Good. I mean, not why I was asking, but good. Oh, why were you asking? So, how's your first thingy? Oh, it's been fun. Don't worry about Flora. Someone always cries at one of these. Sometimes more than one person. Oh no. It's her more often than not. Me. Cry? Absolutely untrue. I have a reputation to maintain. Uh-huh. Now Dallas flipped the table over. Someone's starting to get weepy. I'd say you're about to get... You're getting about as rigorous an education in Misericorde etiquette as you possibly could have. It's certainly been a learning experience. Oh, but it's been fun, right? We're having fun, right? Catherine was just as wine-addled as Flora had been, but it was clearly affecting her differently. Flora had almost seemed like a different girl. Catherine was simply multiplied. Whatever clarity she'd been experiencing when we chatted by the fire earlier had been enhanced with a slightly manic energy. I'm having fun. Yes, absolutely. Good, good. Because you know the Superior would have me hanged if he didn't have a good time. Really? She put you up to this? Oh, good heavens, no. I can just intuit these things. You know? I can just see her bearing down on me because you complained. I don't complain to the Superior. That's good. I mean, not that you have anything to complain about. Sorry, I wasn't insinuating you would complain. Just that... By the way, did you actually know that cow Angela complained about me to her once? To get back at me for... I forgot where I was going with this. You were going to sit down and take it easy, I think. Yes, yes. Thank you, Margaret. Yes, I was. I could sense that my window was closing. Catherine was a very different kind of drunk than Flora, but it seemed like she too was not far from falling to the floor. Actually, Margaret, could you give us a minute? Of course. She looked a little confused, but she obliged. Love her. Very clever. Isn't she just? Margaret's wonderful. Catherine, I've been meaning to ask you something, and it's very important. If it's about the cat, it isn't mine. No, it isn't about the cat. Yeah, I need to get Eustace or one of the other crafty ones to help me with my door. I'm sorry if it bothers you. Does the door bother you? No, it was now or never. James, I spoke to James. He says you can vouch for him about the night Catherine too died. Can you? Is that true? Catherine's brow furrowed slowly and her eyes adjusted in a strange and unexpected manner. It was like I'd forcibly sucked the wine out of her somehow. You spoke to James? What did he say? Not much at all. He professed his innocence, though, and he said you might be able to prove it. Something to do with his travelling cloak. What travelling cloak? The one Darcy found. I was speaking with a whisper lower than I'd known I was capable of. I was terrified that someone might overhear, but there was no turning back now. Not here. We can't talk about this here. Not with everyone else around. Then when? And where? Everyone turned to look at the door in unison. Are we expecting something? Perhaps Sister Darcy has brought us some more food. Moira, who'd been sitting closest to the door, stood up to answer at first. She removed the bolt, swung open the door, and... Moira fell onto her backside and scrambled away from the door on all fours. Everyone else screamed and wailed as soon as they saw what was at the door. The same hulking figure that had threatened me at the end of the hallway all those nights ago. The cloaked figure lumbered forward, its metal boots thudding against the stone floor. Everyone had made for the back of the room as fast as they could, all yelling at the top of their lungs. I myself felt absolutely petrified, but I could not bring myself to move. I just stood there, assuredly white as a sheet, unable to move. I felt like my heart would give up if I took even one step. The monster took another laboured step toward me. I stood there dumbstruck as it brought itself before me. A gauntleted hand reached under its cloak, and with a horrible grinding shriek it drew its sword. Everyone screamed again. They were practically baying. "Cease your feeble inquiries, Sister Hedwig. I'm not afraid of you." Could you believe that this was not a lie? Faced with the sword, I felt an odd sense of peace. The glint of the blade in the candlelight. It offered me a noble release from the predicament I found myself in. "Do not force my hand. Cease." Did you not hear me? I'm not afraid. Then you truly are a fool. Strike me down then. I will gladly die in service to the Lord. I will gladly give myself in defense of what is right and just. If you would have me killed for pursuing the truth, then so be it. I could practically hear everyone's head tilting in confusion at once. It's Angela, isn't it? I bet it's Angela. A musical chord of rustling fabric. I grew tired of this conversation. Consider this a warning. Still pointing their sword at me, the figure took a lurching step backward, only to trip on its own cloak. The woman who had been huddled behind me rushed forward. Adela grabbed the sword that had fallen out of my assailant's hand and then held it at their neck. "Adela, stop! Then remove your disguise, cur, before I cut your head off and cut off your head and remove it myself." The cloaked figure held up their hands defensively. Their hands looked far too small for the bulky gauntlets they wore, unless it's Eustace. I glanced down at their legs and was shocked to see they were twisted and broken. "Your legs? Are you alright?" "Oh yes, let's make sure this creep's legs are unharmed." Stop! My legs are alright." The voice sounded less ragged and imposing now. The figure shifted their weight, and I realised that the big metal boots they'd been wearing had simply come off in the tumble. With a sense of resignation, the monster lifted its hands to the back cloth mask, concealing its face, and... It is Eustace. Eustace! Surprise! How did she know what we were asking about? She bugged us? In the 1400s? That's skills, man. How did she know we were just then talking to Catherine about Catherine? She must have invented a bugging device in the 1400s. Somehow. Maybe it was steam-powered. Eustace, it was you? Yes. Wait a minute. So you're telling me Hedwig's ghost prank was actually your prank? That's right. Eustace winced as she pulled herself to her feet. My most elaborate ever. I know you enjoy tormenting people with your practical jokes, but this was a bit much. Hang on. I don't enjoy tormenting people. That was terrifying. I was so confused. I was dumbfounded. Part of me was relieved to discover that the ghost I'd been seeing was not a ghost at all, but the other part of me was feeling something indescribable towards Eustace. Eustace, why? Well, that's a good question. Mostly because I thought it would be funny. Rather large miscalculation there, I'm afraid. Rather. You thought it was funny the first time. Thought it was funny when I thought this character was something Hedwig made up. Now that I know you actually went and dressed up like a nasty devil and scared her, now all of us, witless, I'm re-evaluating. So was Hedwig right when she told us? Did you really kill a goat? Eustace looked at me with a cold but clearly wounded expression. No. I think perhaps that Hedwig was so overcome with shock that she saw something in the shadows that wasn't there. Entirely reasonable, I should think. You were waving a flaming sword around according to her description. That's a point. No fire this time? Or did Hedwig imagine that too? It seemed like a waste of oil. Not to mention, it's not good for the blade. Eustace beckoned for Adela to pass her the sword back. Adela's eyes narrowed. Absolutely not. Come on, I'm the sacrist. I've got to put it back. I do not think this behaviour is befitting a sacrist, and disrespecting Sister Catherine's sword in this manner. Shameful. We should tell the superior about this. You're overreacting slightly, I think. I disagree. Catherine's sword? I was so angry that I couldn't help but blurt this thought out as soon as it entered my head. Did you not know this, Sister Hedwig? I scrambled to say something that would allay any suspicions. I spoke to Angela about what happened to Catherine, and she said it was the delivery man's sword. Angela thinks she's smarter than she is, although why would she try to deceive you about that? I have no idea. So it really was Catherine's? Well, it certainly wasn't the delivery boy's. Do you know how much a sword costs? Especially one of that size. So how on earth was it Catherine's? It wasn't actually hers, she just liked to borrow it from the library. And you let her? I refuse to be questioned on this by someone who barely knows me and didn't know her at all. You're not in a position to act superior to anyone right now, Eustace. I don't know if we need to tell Soup, but that was not on, Eustace. Margaret, I know for a fact that you and Catherine used to plan and execute far worse. I'm innocent. Catherine too. I think you should calm down, Eustace. I'm sorry we didn't find this prank particularly amusing. You threatened to kill poor Hedwig. I pretended to threaten her. Oh well, in that case. Remind me, Margaret, what happened to the Superior before ours? That was nothing like this and you know it. Yes, it was significantly worse. What are you talking about? Nothing. It was before your time. And before Eustace's, for that matter. So she should keep it out of her mouth. I heard enough about it. Straight from you and her. Stop making this about me. This is about you and your stupid ghost costume. Waving a sword in Hedwig's face. Honestly, how could you? It beggars belief that you'd attempt to flip this around on anyone else. Eustace looked around the room, but nobody offered any support. She was breathing heavily and looked as if she was about to cry. When she was certain nobody was coming to her rescue, she focused on me, Hedwig. I'd struck her so hard my hands stung. Eustace's face was redder than this evening's wine. I realised that I must have scraped her face with my fingernails during the swipe, as there was a touch of blood on her cheek. I half expected her eyes to start welling up with tears, but she just stood there. Perhaps she was dumbstruck. You are cruel, Eustace. Cruel and nasty. Did you enjoy making me feel small? Hedwig... I instinctively raised my hand again, although this time I was held back by several of the women behind me. Easy now. Have you ever said anything earnest to me, Eustace? Have you spoken to me truthfully even once? Of course I have. How can I trust you? Ever? I tried futilely to lunge at her again, but I was not strong enough to overcome the several people gripping my arm and shoulders. I don't know. I don't like you. That is fair. Let's all calm down now, yeah? Yes, I think that's quite enough theatre for the night. What's going on? Tonight's outing, the Misericorde, is concluded, I think. Boo. Blame Eustace, I suppose. It is getting quite late, though. I'll be getting on. She slunk away from the group and out the door too quickly for me to object. The other women who had been holding on to me finally loosened their grips, all except Moira, who patted me on the shoulder consolingly. Let's get you to bed, Hedwig. I nodded, but I kept looking at Eustace. She looked pathetic. She was not openly crying, but I swear I'd heard a sniffle as Moira piloted me past her and out of the room. The others were following suit, muttering to each other in quiet conversation. Once we were out in the hallway, I realised just how stuffy and airless the Misericorde had felt. I took in a breath of fresh air and felt a slight pang of regret, enough to make me turn around to see if Eustace had left the room. Moira tugged me away quickly. I think that's enough for tonight, eh? Oh, I don't know. I think I should apologise. Well, you can do that tomorrow. Right now, what I think you need is some rest. I hit her quite hard. As well you should have, if I'm being frank. What a horrible practical joke. There was a slight twinkling sound as her foot collided with the empty tincture bottle I'd left on my bed earlier. Oops, sorry. Oh no, it's my fault. It must have fallen off the bed. What was in it? She shut the door behind her and sat me down on my bed just like she had on my first day out of my cell. Nothing, not anymore at least. It was something Darcy gave me earlier. Best to be careful drinking anything Darcy gives you. It was actually rather helpful. She said it would give me confidence. Well, we'll have to tell her it was a rousing success, won't we? We both chuckled. What a day, huh? Yes, quite a day. I smiled weakly at her for a moment, but I couldn't maintain the charade for any longer. I burst into tears. Moira made a sympathetic cooing sound and put her hands on my shoulder. I shrugged them off quickly. I'd had quite enough of people attempting to restrain me for one night. Instead, she offered the front of her robe for me to dry my eyes on, which I did accept. There. I think this is all a bit much for you in one go, perhaps. Is it always like this? It feels like the whole abbey just fell apart. And it's all my fault. Well, this definitely wasn't one of our better nights, but... No, I can think of worse. Really? Don't forget someone died not too long ago. I think that might still top you having a little too much to drink. Don't you? Oh, silly me. But even so, we have some colourful personalities here. It's not the first time we've had a minor clash. But I hit her. I had no idea I was even capable. I'm a freak. I should have never left my cell. My heart is stronger than she looks, you know. She's clapped Flora on the cheek more times than I can count. And I'm sure she'll smack Adela one of these days if they keep arguing about the sherry. Oh. And, well, I think Darcy's gotten into it with Catherine before. Although that might just have been under the influence of a particularly bad mushroom. That doesn't count. The details are different, but I'll be honest with you. I think most people remember the boiling over, not what was in the pot. Still, would you believe that I've gotten slapped a few times? What? Why? She chuckled again and I leaned down to give me a kiss on the forehead. So condescending. Now, I'm happy to gossip, but I think I have the right to withhold gossip about myself. Wouldn't you agree? I suppose that makes sense. You can ask Eustace about it, I'm sure. Maybe that's a good way to start mending that bridge. Or you could ask Angela. I'm sure she'd have a particularly dramatic version to share. I groaned into her robe. Oh dear. I have to work with Eustace. We all have to work together, Hedwig. How? In the same room. It's going to be horrible. You'll find a way. We always do. She gently tugged her robe away from me. There was an embarrassingly soggy patch on her chest, visible even on the black fabric in the dim moonlight. I'll see you at service tomorrow? Of course. Good. Get some sleep. You'll feel better in the morning. I promise. She made to leave. When she opened the door, I could hear Angela commenting to her from the landing. It would seem I left just before things got interesting. Yes, well, there's always next time. She shut the door behind her, and their conversation became too muffled to focus on. I collapsed onto the bed, spread-eagled, and then half-heartedly attempted to get into it properly. I stared at the ceiling, unsure of what to do. It was late, but there was absolutely no chance I was going to fall asleep anytime soon. Something felt wrong inside me. Despite Moira's assurances that things would continue as usual, it felt as if I had stepped across a threshold equally as dramatic as the one I'd crossed when I left my cell. Eustace's cruel joke had thrown so much of the past few weeks into question, but nonetheless, I felt a bit ill. I rubbed the hand that I'd struck her cheek with. I could still feel the sting lingering. She terrified me, not just me, but the entire room full of women. For what? All in the service of some hazing ritual? The Superior had warned everyone about that. I realised that she would have only mentioned it if it had been a problem prior. Perhaps this was typical. Perhaps I was unaccustomed to the space I now occupied, unprepared for how adversarial and mean-spirited it was. As it was, there was no denying that over the past few weeks, and tonight especially, I had observed a community on the rocks. It wasn't just Eustace and I. It was Angela and Catherine, Adela and Charity, Flora and, well, everyone else. Those weren't the only conflicts either. All in all, it seemed that this place was a kind of nexus of misery and resentment. I was restless. Sighing deeply, I got up off the bed and quietly crept to my door. There was no conversation emanating from any of the rooms or the hallway. It seemed as if everyone had succeeded where I could not. I did my best to stay sullen as I collected a pricket from the mantel and lit the candle in the fireplace and headed out for a stroll. It was quite cold out now. I thank God for my cosy robes. The thick woolen fabric did an admirable job of protecting me from the elements, and I could ball up the extra fabric in my oversized sleeve to keep my free hand warm. I wandered back and forth across the landing a few times. There was a lot more confidence spending time alone outside now that Eustace had outed herself as my mysterious stalker. I descended the stairs nearest the dorms and did a few laps of the cloister, deep in thought. Should I tell the Superior? I felt uneasy about this. Margaret and a few others had seemed to balk at Adela's idea of involving her. Then again, I would have to report to her sooner or later, and it would be hard to pretend nothing had happened, especially since I'd not even got an answer from Catherine that I'd promised to make my priority. Oh well, it had not been for lack of trying. He didn't try very hard though, but I agree. Perhaps I could corner Catherine before service tomorrow. She hadn't seemed unwilling to talk at all, just unwilling to do it in the company of others, which I could understand. On the other hand, what if Eustace had handed me the evidence that I needed anyway? Who else could have beheaded someone but the woman with access to that sword? How cavalier Eustace had been with their threats too. Cease your meddling. In retrospect, Eustace's attempt at a booming authoritative voice had been a little unconvincing. I've been swept up in the moment, I suppose. Nonetheless, her threats seemed quite targeted. It was not the first time Eustace had advised me to keep my nose clean. I took a turn out of the cloister and into the paths between mostly unused rooms and buildings the Superior had led me past on the way to the hospitalum. The brisk night air was doing something helpful for my thoughts, at the very least, and I wanted to stretch my legs further. Eustace controlled access to the sword, and there was no doubt about that. Thinking more on the situation, was there really any other reason needed to figure her as the perpetrator? Catherine had been beheaded, and the wretched tool had been left in the cloister as an ill omen. I had no idea why Eustace would want to kill Catherine, but was that my responsibility to find out? I had been charged with finding Catherine's killer. Catherine had been killed with a sword. The one sword in the Abbey resided under lock and key, a key that Eustace controlled. What else was there to it? I mean, it's circumstantial at best, right? As I wandered the path toward the outer wall of the Abbey, I became surer and surer of this line of reasoning. Why did the why matter? I was not here to judge. Because motive's a very important part. I thought about Flora. If Eustace was found guilty and handed over to the diocese, maybe the clouds surrounding the Abbey would part. Maybe she could be happy. I thought about Catherine. Something was weighing on her, and it was clearly something to do with the night of Catherine II's death. Had she seen something? Was she simply too afraid to speak? She certainly left in a hurry after Eustace's little stunt backfired. This too might have been resolved if Eustace was found to be the guilty one. I reached the end of the courtyard and stood in the shadow of the crumbling outer wall. Goodness, they really should have built a gate here. Anyone could come into the Abbey from this direction if they braved the hill in the cold. It could have been anyone. And yet, the longer I turned things over in my head, the more I thought about the ghost stories people had told earlier in the evening. That cloud of negativity, maybe it really was a haunting. Eustace had been dressed up as my ghost, but what about Flora's? Adela's? Was every ghost story here a tale born of Eustace's mean streak? I found that hard to believe as much as it astounded me. Demons and devils, they infested this place. I saw a light in the distance. My heart dropped out of my chest. I scrambled ahead through the open archway into the wall, desperate to see what was out there on the moorland this late at night. The rolling hillocks made it difficult to get a good look from my position. I did my best to quietly hop and sprint forward, keeping myself as high a position in the rolling field as I could. The light ahead of me kept dripping out of sight. Finally, I got close enough to get a good look at their shape. They were taking the same route as the Superior and I had travelled the other day. I froze. The traveller had not seen me, but they were liable at any moment if they'd happened to look over their shoulder. Looking back on it, the intelligent choice would have been for me to turn back to the Abbey right away, wake the Superior up and catch Eustace. I was assuming, in whatever duplicitous act she was up to, but perhaps through a mixture of wine and whatever Darcy had given me earlier in the evening, I was not acting intelligently, not to mention the sheer rush of shock I was feeling at that moment. I followed her. It was not easy. It was quite cold out, and even in the moonlight I had to rely on my candle to watch my footing. A strong gust of wind could have extinguished my light, but mercifully it survived the whole trip. What would I have done if she'd turned around, huh? I can't say for sure. I presumed I would have blown the candle out and run straight backwards. After an agonizingly long walk, we arrived at the hospitalum. My heart was pounding out of my chest. The figure ahead of me broke left, around the back door that the Superior and I had taken down to the lower level of the building. My first impulse was to watch through the small window I'd seen at the top of the dungeon, but I realized how obvious that would be if either of them happened to look up. I blew out my candle just to make sure I was invisible. Another part of me wanted to simply tackle the mystery nun on the stairs before she could get to James and demand to know what she was doing out there, or she might be killing James. But I reasoned it would likely be more useful to hear what they were going to talk about. Were threats going to be made? Would I learn some earth-shattering secret that would illuminate the conspiracy I was working to unfold? I stood as close to the window as I could, while still feeling reasonably out of sight. This, frustratingly, made it impossible to see what was happening. I was hopeful that the sound would carry, but they spoke quietly and the echo made it impossible to discern anything meaningful. I could at least make out that the tenor of the conversation was calm. I had been worried that I was about to overhear an intense argument or violent threats, but whatever James and his mystery liaison had to say to each other, it never rose above a dull whisper. I wanted very badly to take a peek through the little window, but the moonlight was such that anyone passing in front of the opening would be supremely obvious. The conversation grew quieter and I became worried that they'd grown suspicious. Eventually I made out a sigh of resignation. I suddenly realised if their conversation came to a close while I was still here, I'd have to follow the person I was spying on back to the Abbey as I was now without a candlelight. I didn't want to further risk being caught following this person. I crept away from the wall I'd been pressed up against and then began to sprint back toward the Abbey. I hoped anyway. It was very dark outside. There was enough moonlight to see the general shape of the ground in front of me, but little else. I ran as I had never run in my entire life. I was out of breath quickly, and soon after that I could feel a sharp pinching pain in my side. I stopped every now and then to collect myself, making sure not to change direction on accident. I didn't even know if I'd started running in the right direction. I just knew that further adjustment would surely result in disaster. I'd never run like this before, and it was making me aware of muscles and bones that I never realized existed. My inner thighs felt stretched and ready to snap. My chest grew tight. Whenever I pushed myself particularly hard, that pinching pain returned harder, and with a pulsing rhythm I could feel under my skin, as if lute strings inside me were being plucked. Bodies are truly disgusting things, aren't they? Miraculously, it seemed as I had aimed true. I could see the abbey walls ahead of me. I had veered a little, somewhere along the road, but not as significantly as I'd feared. I slowed my sprint to a canter and then eventually to a limping walk. I made it through the archway I had walked through earlier, and then my knees gave out. I fell to the ground completely exhausted. I rolled onto the grass next to me and attempted to get to my feet, but I was spent. I retched a few times. Groaning, I made it up on all fours. Black bile spilled out of my mouth into the grass with another heave. I realized that it was mostly wine I was expelling, sore and sickly. I was truly pathetic to behold. I could feel my body giving up. I struggled to remain awake. I couldn't just pass out here, but that's what we did. We didn't drink that much, did we? Hedwig, what are you doing out here? I scrambled to my feet. Catherine was standing in the archway looking concerned. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk around the abbey. Must have pushed myself too hard. Goodness, do you need any help? She was smiling, but she looked rather peculiar. She held her hands behind her back, a rigid pose I'd never seen her stand in before. No, thank you. Thank you, though. I see. Well, have a good night. Catherine? What were you doing? The same thing you were, of course. I can never sleep after a night of Misericorde drama. What did you and James talk about? I felt a surge of bravery. We were alone. It was the middle of the night. She could not weasel out of this one. I don't know what you're talking about. Catherine, please. She sighed deeply. Listen, you must promise not to tell anyone about this. How do you know about James anyway? I asked the Superior to introduce us. Since I was replacing Catherine too as chronicler, I wanted to know what I was stepping into. He told me he didn't kill her. And then he told me you could vouch for him. Ah. We stood in silence for a moment. And you believe him? I do. And? What do you stand to gain from helping him exactly? It just seems like the right thing to do. I wouldn't want to occupy a position I had lingering questions about. Catherine nodded, looking less confident than I'd ever seen her. Very well. I can certainly tell you that he did not kill her. Really? How? He mentioned something about his tunic. What did he tell you? That was more or less the whole of it. I was trying to ask you for details in the Misericorde. Well, I know he was not wearing the tunic when Catherine too was found. How? Because he was with me. And he didn't slip away? No. I'm quite sure of that. Where were you? In my dormitory room. Really? Why? Oh, he was banging her. Hedwig, this is humiliating enough. Please don't make me say it. What? I'm confused. Oh my goodness. This would be precious if it didn't feel so, well, mortified. All I could offer in response was a blank expression. Hedwig, James and I we had a relationship. A physical relationship. I know he didn't kill Catherine because we'd been fucking. Is that conclusive enough for you? Is that what you wanted to hear? Hedwig? Hedwig, are you? My energy had finally dried up completely. My knees gave way. I saw a smear of stars and then black. Called it. Hedwig? Hedwig. Huh? There she is. Thank goodness. Thank you for your assistance, Moira. What happened? I was on a walk to the privy and I found you passed out on the path. Huh? Wait, no. Oh dear. She's still delirious. I'm beginning to worry the thin mountain air isn't very good for her. Do you have any dried fruit around here? Yes. One moment. I was lying on the floor in the Superior's office. Moira and Catherine were standing above me, both looking concerned. Moira most especially. Catherine's concern, it seemed, went beyond my well-being. Do you remember what happened before you fainted, Hedwig? Catherine and I were talking and... No, that was after I found you. Moira and... I'm quite worried about this. The Superior returned with a small wooden bowl. Moira plucked a small dry berry from it and crouched down to feed it to me. Something sweet might help at least. So you're on a walk, Hedwig. You look exhausted. Yes, I was unable to sleep. Sleep deprived. Of course, that explains the, the confusion. Yes, it would. Thank God you went to the privy when you did, Catherine. I don't particularly love that phrasing, but yes. The berry Moira had given me was definitely sweet and delicious, although I wasn't really sure how it happened. Nevertheless, I was lucid enough to understand that Catherine was signalling to me that the information that she shared with me was not something she wished to discuss in front of Moira and the Superior. No shit. Begrudgingly, I played along. Yes, I remember now. I was restless after what happened in the Misericorde and went for a walk to clear my head. I think I probably had too much to drink. Oh dear. What happened in the Misericorde? Nothing you need to worry yourself with, Superior. Just our typical womanly exploits. The Superior sighed but did not push the subject. Well, thank you, Catherine, at any rate. God only knows what would have happened to poor Hedwig if you hadn't found her. And thank you, Moira, for being on hand to help her. I was on my way to the privy as well when Catherine found me. What luck! Ugh. A strange but welcome miracle. Well, I see no reason for you all to be crowding my floor at this late hour. Off to bed with you, all of you. Of course. I was pulled to my feet by my would-be saviours and guided toward the door. Oh, and Hedwig? If you don't mind, I'd appreciate you checking in tomorrow after service. Just so I can confirm you're well. Yes, Superior. Once through the door, I was able to move with my own strength. Alright, we're going to wrap this one up here. But, yeah, okay. Well, that makes sense, I suppose. Well, I mean, that means she can... If she knows that he didn't do it, and she can fucking vouch for him, then why is he still sitting in the cell? Why didn't she back him up? I guess because she didn't want everyone to know that he was banging her. Well, I mean, he'll die otherwise, so I guess you gotta suck it up, right? Anyway, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, Bruce, and I'll see you tomorrow.